Hello, welcome to the community listening session on economic stabilization and recovery. My name is Jen Gray O'Connor, and I will be your facilitator for this process. This evening, community members will provide testimony to Council. In January, the Council agreed on 3 shared priority issues that they wanted to focus their collective efforts on in the face of multiple crises. This evening's meeting is geared towards hearing from community members on one of those 3 priority issue areas, which in this case is economic stabilization and recovery. But time is also allocated at the end of this meeting for comments on any issue. I want to start just by providing an overview of our agenda. First, I'm going to read our electronic meeting notice as well as our rules of conduct. Then we'll hear from Budget Director Jessica Kennard on a Budget 101. Next, we'll hear from invited community testimony on economic stabilization and recovery. Then we'll open it up to community testimony on economic stabilization and recovery, followed by community testimony on any topic. And finally, we'll conclude with remarks from Council and Mayor Wheeler. We want to let you know that there will be additional opportunities to make your voice heard. There are 2 more listening sessions and hearings. The next one will be this Saturday, April 17th, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that community listening session will be on community safety. Following that, we'll have the mayor's proposed budget hearing on May 5th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. At any time, if you would like to submit online testimony, you can do so at portlandoregon.gov/CBO, as well as you can email testimony to budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. Under the Portland City Code, as well as state law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of Council are attending remotely by video and by teleconference. And the city has made several avenues available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. This meeting is available on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, at portlandoregon.gov/video, as well as on channel 30. The public can also provide written testimony to Council on the Budget Office website, portlandoregon.gov/CBO, and by email at budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. The Council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. This pandemic is an emergency that threatens public health, safety, welfare, and it requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. Okay, next I'm going to read our rules of conduct. The City Council represents all Portlanders and needs to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during the City Council meeting so that everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in the Council hearing, participants apply to give testimony online. If you did not apply and you'd like to give testimony to Council, please submit the testimony in writing at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. When testifying, please state your name for the record, but your address is not necessary. Declare if you are a lobbyist or if you're representing an organization, please identify it. You have 2 minutes to testify. You'll be timed by staff, Zach Johnson, and when your time is over, you'll be given a verbal warning and then muted after 2 minutes have passed to allow for as much participation as possible. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony will not be allowed. If there are any disruptions, a warning will be given, and further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected for the remainder of the electronic meeting. Please be aware that all Council meetings are recorded. And thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. So tonight is an opportunity for community members to provide testimony to our decision makers to inform this budget as well as future budgets. And to help orient us to this process, we'll hear from Budget Director Jessica Kennard, who will give us a Budget 101. Director Kennard.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. All right, just a moment here. All right, so good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jessica Kennard, and I am the city's budget director. I'm going to provide you with a very brief, high-level overview of the city's budget to help inform and empower your engagement tonight and in the future. Next slide, please. So the city is not the only entity providing important public services to Portlanders, and we partner with other local and regional governments to provide comprehensive services to our communities. The county, which for Portland includes Multnomah, Clark, and Washington counties, provides human services, public health services, libraries, the district attorney, and management of the jail and parole and probation systems, among other services. TriMet provides bus, light rail, and commuter rail service in the greater Portland region. And Metro plans for the future of the Portland region and provides parks, venues, and services that cross city and county lines. Additionally, the public school systems are important jurisdictional partners. Next slide, please. At the city, we organize our bureaus and services into 7 major service areas, all pictured on this slide with the exception of elected offices. The city's Bureau of Transportation manages traffic infrastructure, parking, the streetcar, and locally owned roads. Public utilities include the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Water Bureau. Public safety includes police, fire, 911 call taking, and emergency management services. The Parks and Recreation Bureau is a single bureau but has several functions and services listed on this slide. Community development includes the Bureau of Development Services, Planning and Sustainability, Office of Community and Civic Life, Housing Bureau, and the Office for Community Technology. And finally, city support services includes all of those back office functions that support frontline service provision. Next slide, please. This chart shows how the city's total $5.6 billion budget is divided amongst these 7 service areas. These total budget figures include both operating dollars for day-to-day functions, as well as dollars for multi-year needs. The largest service area is our public utilities, followed by administration and support. This is because these functions hold large multi-year capital and debt finance plans, so their total budget figures incorporate much more than annual operating budgets. Next slide, please. Budget conversations and decisions often focus on general fund discretionary resources, as these resources can be allocated with few restrictions. However, of the total city budget, only about 10% is comprised of discretionary resource. It's important to remember that as we talk about general fund discretionary allocations, we're only talking about a relatively small piece of the city's budget pie. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at discretionary funds, the city's current year adopted budget included just under $570 million in general fund discretionary resource. And the chart shows how these resources are allocated amongst the city's service areas. The majority of general fund discretionary dollars are used to support public safety services, including police, fire and rescue, and the 911 call taking system. The Police Bureau is the largest general fund allocation, followed by fire and rescue. Additionally, the city spends a notable portion of discretionary resources on parks and recreation services and community development services, such as homeless services and planning services. Next slide, please. Our city economist, Josh Harwood, is responsible for forecasting our available general fund discretionary resources over a 5-year horizon. Josh's most recent forecast, produced in February, anticipates a deficit of $20.2 million in discretionary resource heading into next year. This means that the City Council will need to close a budget gap of $20.2 million, either by reducing expenditures or by identifying new revenue, in order to present a balanced budget as required by Oregon statute over the next couple of months. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound, albeit nuanced, impact on a number of city revenue streams. Several revenue streams, as listed in red, are currently experiencing or anticipated to experience significant declines as a result of the impact of the public health crisis. However, due in large part to the generosity of Portland voters, it's not all bad news. This coming year, Portland communities will be benefiting from 2 new voter-approved revenue streams, with the Portland Parks Levy and with the Metro Tax for Supportive Housing Services. The funding for the latter will come to the Joint Office of Homeless Services via Multnomah County. We're also awaiting finalized rules guidance for local allocations of the Federal American Rescue Plan Act, which will provide much needed financial support. Next slide, please. So the featured topic of today's listening session is economic stabilization and recovery. This issue, as Jen mentioned, is one of 3 priority areas that were shared by all 5 council members. It's also an issue area that all service areas within the city support in some way. The Bureau of Transportation is working to facilitate easy, safe, and effective use of the right-of-way to promote economic stabilization and recovery. Public utilities promote development through their large capital improvement plans, and these bureaus are also focused on the affordability of utility bills. Within our public safety bureaus, the Bureau of Emergency Management supports our neighborhood emergency response teams, or NETs, and coordinate regional emergency response efforts. And bureaus in the service area are also striving to provide stable first responder services during crisis. Parks and Recreation promotes safe and healthy recreation and effective use of the city's open spaces. Community development is perhaps the most closely aligned with economic stabilization and recovery, and bureaus within the service area support affordable housing, our development pipeline through planning, zoning, and permitting, community technology and digital equity, economic and workforce development, and community engagement through our Office of Community and Civic Life. Finally, our back office city support services also play an integral role in stabilization and recovery, from advocating at the state and federal level for resources and policies that we need, to ensuring we have strong financial management practices, setting the foundation for recovery. Next slide, please. For more information on the city's budget, I encourage you to visit the City Budget Office website at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. We also welcome email with your budget questions at citybudgetoffice@portlandoregon.gov. Next slide, please. You may also visit the City Budget Office's website in order to share your thoughts on the city's budget. Today is the second of 4 all-council budget outreach events, as Jen mentioned, and you may sign up for future events by going to the Budget Office website. Additionally, you may submit online testimony by visiting the Budget Office website or via the Portland Maps website as listed on the slide. You may also email your comment to budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. All written testimony will be shared with the council. This concludes my presentation. You can stop the slideshow now. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Great. Thank you so much for that helpful overview to help orient us tonight. Next, we're going to move into our invited community testimony. Just to give you a background, council office is connected with community members to ensure that we're hearing a diversity of voices during this listening session. Our first testimony of the evening is dedicated to this invited testimony, which will then be followed by open testimony from the public. There will be 2 minutes for testimony, and a timekeeper will time your testimony. When our timekeeper says time, please conclude your comments. If you're joining us by phone, use *6 to mute or unmute yourself. And then we will move to our open testimony.
Hello. Our first 3 presenters are Jan Mason, Ashley Henry, and Keith Jones. We will start with Jan.
Good evening, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Mapps, Commissioner Rubio, and Commissioner Ryan. For the record, my name is Janice Mason. I co-chair the Community Chamber Coalition of Oregon. I'm the president of Philippine American Chamber of Commerce and serve on Governor Brown's Racial Justice Council. As a representative of culture-specific business chambers, we believe the economic future must be grounded on the right investments. In the J District, as an example, our Asian American community are not just struggling financially, but continue to be impacted with the rise of xenophobia and racial bias and hate. From loss of revenue, loss of employees, to loss through property damage, our small businesses need you to be bold and choose investments that address disparities exacerbated by the pandemic. Small business owners with less than 10 or 20 employees, as well as a solo entrepreneur, are highly vulnerable and at risk discontinuing their American dream of building legacy wealth. Please invest not just for recovery, but also for supporting newly created business ventures, workforce development, and business development programming with startup capital training and longer-term prosperity. We call on also that racial equity and inclusion should be a first thought and not an afterthought. Racial equity lens implies application afterwards. Portland is not just downtown Portland, but consists of many neighborhoods and financial revenue generating taxpaying districts, such as J District, Albina Neighborhood, Hawthorne District, and many more. Prioritize stabilization, existing as well as new, will create industry clusters for future infrastructure so we can build both resiliency and recovery. The opportunity of grounding budget decisions and equity is upon us through the American Rescue Plan Act as well. Decisions made now will be historic and crucial in positioning a dynamic and equitable future for Portlanders and future generations for socially and economically disadvantaged, our most vulnerable African, Black, Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, Native American, and more who are marginalized in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Ashley.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Henry, and I'm the Executive Director of Business for a Better Portland. We represent over 350 businesses in the Portland area. Many of them are small businesses that have been challenged or even closed due to the pandemic. That being said, some of our members are doing just fine during the pandemic and actually may be doing better now than they were before COVID. This is the reality of our K-shaped recovery. These thriving companies are not looking for us to get something for them, but rather they know that their fates are tied with those who have not fared well. And being a member is their way to speak up for businesses who haven't been as fortunate. We're also honored to be trusted collaborators with culturally specific chambers of commerce, including the Oregon Native American Chamber and Jan Mason from the Philippine American Chamber. Some important requests that I want to lift up to you tonight as you consider the city's budget include to utilize the equitably designed application that Prosper Portland established for the CARES funds and ensure that the first round of ARPA funds go to those applications that were unsuccessful in 2020. I would also implore you to consider funding innovative partnerships like a new initiative proposed by a group called Bricks Need Mortar and a new Portland company that's called Kuto. That initiative will both drive local purchasing and would reduce credit card transaction fees that small businesses have to pay with each purchase. I also want to make sure that you are willing to invest in building the capacity of organizations that have stepped into the breach since COVID to lift up the voices of small business owners that are not represented by conventional trade associations and lobbyists. We have known all along that Portland is a small business town, and this is a historic opportunity for the city to help under-resourced organizations that have been operating on fumes to support their members and the broader community. As it pertains to housing, I want to ask you to leverage the remarkable opportunity we have with the region's supportive housing dollars coming online in July and maintain your city commitment to the Joint Office for Homeless Services and make sure that you make that city one-time only contribution permanent. This is a unique partnership that even King County and Seattle have chosen to replicate. So I think it's something worth investing in. And finally, I want to also call out the opportunity to prevent a reduction in the BDS workforce. These cuts would impede the Bureau's ability to keep up with a recovering development and construction industry, and that will hurt Portland's ability to deliver on the Metro bond and maximize affordable housing development. We absolutely must keep housing production on track. And as you can tell, my golden retriever entirely agrees with keeping BDS staff stable. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next, we have Keith.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner Mapps, for the invitation tonight. My name is Keith Jones. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Green Loop. Since the summer of 2019, I've been working with the food cart owners that were displaced from the Alder Street food cart pod. And it's been an amazing experience to get to know them, the owners and the families over this last few years. Almost all of them are people of color, and many of them are refugees and immigrants. Thanks to Prosper Portland, they have a place to store their carts and at the post office site. But after years of hard work, we have a shovel-ready plan to get the cart owners back in business in a place that will help revitalize downtown called the Culinary Corridor. Food carts are a low barrier entry pathway to small business ownership. And with the loss of many of our independent restaurants due to COVID, critical to rebuilding our culinary scene moving forward. Food carts breathe life back into downtown after the financial crash in 2008, and they can help lead us back again, but we need your help to make that happen. We need permits right now from Parks and PBOT and funds for infrastructure. The food cart owners aren't looking for a handout, but they need a hand up right now to make it possible for them to get back in business this summer. This is a project that will generate immediate positive results. The cart owners and I would be happy to brief you and your teams about the details, but we need action in the next 30 days to be open this summer to help bring Portland back to live our values by supporting immigrant entrepreneurs. Please help us make it happen. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I've got like a little visual back here of that park, of what it could look like. I don't know if you've been down there, but it's not in great shape right now, but it could be. So thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next three speakers will be Susanbladholm, Paul Limley, and Sarah Zahn. We'll start with Susan. Susan?
Hello, City Council members. My name is Susanbladholm, and I'm the founder of Friends of Frog Ferry. And Commissioner Maps, thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. As you all consider how we rebuild and recover and work towards a new and better Portland, I ask you to be bold, to build confidence of residents, and to ask your Bureau leaders to collaborate. As you know, all Portlanders need to feel safe. They need housing and food, and they need to feel confident about Portland. I serve on the Brand and Reputation Committee for Portland's recovery, and also I'm working with 8 city bureaus and more than 50 city employees to bring a passenger ferry service to the region. What I hear most often from city employees is, how do we ensure there's no risk for the city for this project? What I want to say is, how can we risk continuing with status quo planning amidst increasing greenhouse gas emissions? How can we risk not having vessels on the water in the event of a major catastrophic earthquake? How can we afford to not look at best practices that are environmentally friendly, that foster social equity, and that provide connections for families to green spaces? I ask you all to be bold as we consider a future Portland. Visionary projects will not move forward unless you as commissioners lead the way. Once commissioners have gotten involved with the Frog Ferry conversations, and I really appreciate those of you that have helped, it's remarkable how much more productive city staff are in their engagement once they know they have permission from you to be open to learn more. Please foster collaboration for the agencies you lead. Please reward bureaus that collaborate and work towards a healthy city rather than just focusing on siloed bureau goals. There are other private citizens like me who are willing to take on most of the work and cost and risk, and your insistence on collaboration and innovation with other bureaus in the private sector makes a difference on how efficiently we will stabilize, recover, and thrive. With your leadership, Portlanders and the rest of the world will fall in love with a new and better Portland.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Paul.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. My name is Paul Limley, and I'm a citizen of the Yakima Nation. I'm also the Executive Director of the Native American Youth and Family Center. As you consider the fiscal year 21-22 budget, we ask that you consider the following priorities. Business development. NAYA has increased economic viability of the Coley community by holding master leases and offering affordable retail space for entrepreneurs in Coley. We offer one-on-one coaching and a 10-week class that equips business innovators with the tools to succeed, including a business plan and business technical knowledge. Please hold these effective programs harmless in the budget process. Protecting businesses impacted by the pandemic. From June 2020 through December 2020, NAYA has served 137 entrepreneurs with 809 hours of technical assistance. NAYA partnered with Prosper Portland, Multnomah County, and Oregon Community Foundation to award and distribute $820,000 in funding to 104 entrepreneurs, most of them being Native and BIPOC business owners. Our services to these businesses were critical to their survival. As of today, all business tenants are up to date on rent, and we have not seen any permanent closures because of the pandemic. In closing, we ask that the next fiscal year to continue to prioritize culturally specific programs that uplift BIPOC communities. We ask that flexible funding opportunities be made available for culturally specific organizations to deliver community wealth building. This continued partnership will create stability and opportunity for BIPOC communities and low-income people. I would like to highlight that more funding is needed for culturally specific programs to meet the large demand. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide remarks tonight. We value the critical partnership with the support of City Council and Prosper Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sarah.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Sarah Zahn. Thank you, Commissioner Ryan, for the invitation to testify this evening. I am the Director of Development at Urban Development Partners and the Board Chair of Oregon Smart Growth. And I am here today along with Rob Martino, representing the broad coalition of companies and unions and tens of thousands of women and men who work in the development, construction, and property management industries. Thank you for having us here today. While the Bureau of Development Services has done an incredible job of pivoting to do business in entirely new ways during this pandemic, it is struggling financially and drawing on financial resources to mitigate reduced fee revenue through the pandemic at a clip of nearly $2 million per month since March. To slow the drawdown, BDS has been considering a deep 17% cut to the Bureau's budget and significant staffing cuts that will impede the Bureau's ability to keep up with a recovering development and construction industry. Portland cannot afford to get in the way of our own recovery, especially when it comes to the housing market, where we're starting from behind. Eco Northwest recently presented research that showed in May to October of 2020, there was a 27% decline in new building permits, and that we continue to underbuild relative to the new households in our region, putting upward pressure on rents and prices. Recent news has showed that a continued and dramatic drop in new multifamily housing permits. Too many renters were severely cost burdened going into the COVID crisis, and homeownership is out of reach to a growing number of Portlanders. It's imperative to stabilize BDS and not hinder permit processing, which will only reinforce investors' concerns about the Portland market, in addition to negatively impacting the city's workforce and the Bureau's ability to bounce back. This coalition is aligned in support of a one-time infusion into the Bureau's budget and of BDS's requested budget and $10.4 million ad package that supports City Council's top 3 priorities: economic recovery, houselessness, and community safety. With over $207 million coming into the city from the federal government's American Rescue Plan, we have the opportunity now to maintain stability at BDS, to support near-term recovery and jobs, and strengthen Portland's ability to meet communities' housing needs in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last 2 invited speakers are John Duren and Rob Martineau. We will start with John.
Yes, hello. My name is John Duren. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of ASME Local 189. As well, and just to be transparent, I'm also the lead accountant for the Bureau of Development Services, although I'm not here speaking in that capacity tonight as a city employee. I'm basically here to speak about what the effects of the impending layoffs could potentially have on our Bureau if we are not granted the $10.4 million budget package that we have requested. We have a very skilled workforce that is extremely hard to replace. It takes great time for recruitment, for training, and as well, we're competing with the private sector for a lot of these similar positions. I started in 2015, and I was basically hired right when the Bureau just started to take off. We had just recovered kind of from the Great Recession of 08. However, we hadn't still picked up enough employees to maintain levels. So levels didn't actually get fully back to what they were until about 2017. We go through this cycle every time there's a downturn in the economy, and we really need the help at this time to help the Bureau and the employees specifically keep their jobs and maintain service levels. The equity impacts at our Bureau would be great. We have what would be known as more of a 2-dimensional workforce. We have a lot of seasoned employees and a lot of rookie employees. We have a transition plan where the seasoned employees, we're training up the rookie employees. If we're forced to lay off, a lot of those rookie employees will be the ones that will be first out the door. And when these seasoned employees come up for retirement in 2 to 3 years, we won't have an experienced workforce, thus further delaying permitting. Permitting is at the crux of everything we're talking about, whether it's the development of buildings, affordable housing, housing units, the food carts that Mr. Jones talked about. If we can't operate, we hold back the economic development and recovery of Portland entirely. So I would just encourage you and ask that you grant our $10.4 million package to help buy us the time we need to get past this economic downturn. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next, we have Rob.
Hi, this is Rob Martineau. I am the president of the District Council of Trade Unions and AFSCME Local 189, and we represent many of the hardworking men and women in the Bureau of Development Services. John really did cover well what happened in 2008 and what that recovery did. That recovery actually, I believe, stalled the housing market. It was a bottleneck to affordable housing, to really the housing crisis that we have. The lack of supply is in part due to what it took to get the permit system back up and running again and at full capacity. So really, I'm here to speak on behalf of maintaining full capacity at BDS, supporting that $10 million ask so that we can really be on the front edge, helping to drive or helping to support businesses as they really rev up that giant economic engine of construction and help us all in relieving the housing crisis and those things that need to occur. Equity can't be understated as an impact in this. As a union and as the city, we have all had a lot of work to do with bringing a more diverse and equitable workforce to bear in Portland. We have worked together and been able to do that. These will be the people most impacted by these layoffs. These are good living wage jobs where you can raise a family, you can live in Portland, and you can support your community. People support their communities where they live. Nobody commutes in 45 minutes to coach a little league team or soccer or anything like that. So with that, it really is a broader support to the community in really maintaining these jobs. Many of these trades folks and support staff have state certifications that you cannot just go get in a day. These take time, years in the trades, and once you've left or gone to another municipality, it really seems difficult to come back. And whether you've let state certs lapse and gone back into the trades, or whether you've started with another municipality.
Time.
So the final thing, and I know I've touched on it, is the housing crisis. It's not going to improve without BDS. We cannot afford to let BDS become a bottleneck in the building system again. The housing bond that we all supported is too important. The Housing Bureau's work is critical to the housing supply and those that really need to transition to affordable housing. With that, I'll just wrap up and say the impacts of not supporting and fully funding BDS will be felt across numerous other bureaus and at every level in our community. So Mayor and Commissioners, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn it back to Jen, who will introduce the next section of testimony.
And thank you to all of our invited speakers for your testimony and your time. Now we're going to hear open testimony on economic stabilization and recovery. And just as a reminder, you have 2 minutes for the testimony. And then when you hear Zach say time, that's our conclusion. If you're joining us by phone, please push *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. The next 3 speakers are Randy Gregg, Emery Mort, and John Spector. We will start with Randy.
Good evening. Thanks for allowing me to testify. Portland Parks Foundation respectfully requests $100,000 from the mayor's budget. This would be a restoration of amounts funded in 2019-20 and 18 and 19. Last year, our allocation was cut by half. Since we routinely work across bureaus, it's appropriate to fund this from the mayor's budget. Since PPF began receiving city funding in 2018, it's leveraged more than a 10-to-1 return on investment in monies directly for parks projects and programs. We do a lot of things from rallying and training 200 plus parks-oriented community groups to things like building a bridge for the Wildwood Trail over Burnside. This is the foundation's 20th anniversary, and it's an important juncture in the city's history. We are working on several fronts that have an impact on economic recovery, most importantly, civic morale. This city needs some short yard wins, good press, and some Instagrammable moments. We are actively working on and have raised over $130,000, for instance, to restore and reinstall the Thompson Elk statue. We're developing public-private partnership for a reopening and programming of O'Brien Square, Ankeny West Plaza, and the Culinary Corridor, which Keith addressed. Reopening these blighted eyesores with fun, food, and opportunities for immigrant businesses. We're developing a June campaign for branding Portland as the City of Gardens to celebrate our world-class collection of public gardens. And we're developing Paseo, an August festival of the arts to reanimate downtown's oldest parks. Some of you may remember Artquake. This is not what we're doing. We started our public engagement process with a 3-part think tank of BIPOC and social justice leaders to build relationships and respectful representation. And all participants are receiving stipends and include 15 community members, among them Friends of Noise and Albina Vision. And with them, we will design this festival to represent and be for all Portlanders. Our motto is we help people help parks. This year, we want to help people help downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Emery.
Good evening, Council. My name is Emery Mort from Portland Metro People's Coalition.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I apologize. Before Randy goes away, Randy, sorry, Randy, is that a separate ask or is that part of the PPF ask?
No, it's the PPF ask.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Emery. Thank you. I just needed that clarification.
That's okay. Emery Mort from Portland Metro People's Coalition. I'm here to talk about the stabilization of people most at the margins. Briefly think back to last week's gun violence hearing. We were initially presented with the old options, spend the money the usual way to solve a serious problem. And instead, because times are changing and people are learning they can be more bold, we saw a very different plan come together. But we heard in that hearing from Black people, from Latino people, from immigrant and Indigenous organizers, that people are really stretched thin, that chronic underinvestment and harm is hurting Black communities. The rent's up, families are hurting. People aren't giving up, but it's a crisis. In the previous budget hearing on housing, we heard from workers hired by the city to help those close to houselessness, that almost 90% of that contracted workforce aren't making a living wage to live in Portland. They're on social services to provide social services. We've been reading about how the Portland region was paying prisoners $1 a day to pick up trash before those workers were trapped in COVID outbreaks. So this region and other regions is facing a reckoning. Are the political gatekeepers going to rely on destabilized people from destabilized communities to pick up after society's ideological choices? Or are your bodies going to actively build multiracial material well-being in the form of economic well-being? Stabilization and recovery has many forms, but needs to start with Black people, young Black people, and it needs to start with the movement for their lives. So here, that government, city, county, state needs to build a solution: jobs with living wages, education, homes, and care. Make and build a society. Don't merely manage the society that white capital interests have handed down. The ideology and practices whose outcomes you have been apologizing for in these chambers. We have emergencies to solve in this budget and going forward.
Time.
And this community is going to fight to fulfill our commitment to the creation of bold, systemic, and liberatory change. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Josh.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Josh Spector, and I'm an organizer with Sunrise Movement PDX, a youth-led environmental justice organization. I grew up in what we now call Portland, Oregon, and attended Portland Public Schools from K through 12. I was born in the summer of 1997 on a day where the temperature topped out at only 73 degrees at PDX. This was in the middle of July, when we had a global average CO2 concentration of 364 parts per million, a level now considered detrimental to all life on Earth. My climate fate had already been sealed before I was even born. Last week, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, released data revealing we are now at the highest CO2 levels since the mid-Pliocene warm period, 3.6 million years ago, and are now at over 421 parts per million. For reference, the average global temperature then was over 7 degrees warmer than it is now, and sea level was over 78 feet higher than it is now. The environment at the poles was roughly akin to what we are living in currently in Portland. Today, in mid-April of 2021, I look at the forecast and see almost 2 weeks straight of no rain and several days of over 80 degrees. This is an emergency. And the only way out of it is through a redirection of public funds to the things that harden us for the interconnected crises we are facing as a city and society. You, the power holders of our city, must focus on the needs of its citizens instead of prioritizing the many times over invalidated idea of trickle-down economics that corporate-controlled Travel Portland, Portland Business Alliance, and Prosper Portland are pushing for it to continue. Instead, our budget should be geared towards providing our fellow citizens a jobs guarantee focused on building out a green 21st century infrastructure that prepares us for the rapid increase in fires, extreme winter storms, the impending mega earthquake, and depleting snowpacks and water supply we are facing. Providing housing for all, as the inconceivable force of climate change increases, is essential for you if you want to even try to claim that you care about the dignity of your constituents.
Time.
It's not your fault that the climate crisis is here, but you can do a whole lot to protect a sliver of humanity from it. The houseless community is not feeling your aid. Stop the sweeps, abolish the police, land back. True equity is not possible under capitalism.
Thank you. Our next three speakers will be Danielle Meyer, Hyung Nam, and Melissa Nato. We will start with Danielle.
Hello, commissioners. Hi, my name is Danielle Meyer. I am an organizer with Sunrise PDX, youth-led climate justice organization. I'm showing up in this space today because, as Commissioner Hardesty has said, the budget is a moral document and it deserves to be treated as such by honoring effective public engagement. However, these conversations, especially ones regarding subjects like economic stabilization and recovery, are deeply disconnected from what it means to engage the community. Decisions made in these spaces and in the more intimate spaces that exist between counselors and staff can and will deeply affect how and if people can afford to live. A few public hearings for input after the bulk of the budget is formed is not community involvement in the budget process, and that in itself is detrimental to economic stabilization and recovery. Another aspect being discussed as part of these sessions is also detrimental to communal recovery is directing any type of funding to law enforcement agencies. In 2019, people living on the streets accounted for more than 50% of arrests and nearly 40% of jail bookings. With the eviction moratorium ending in 79 days and wildfire season quickly approaching, we're entering a period in which people are being rapidly displaced to the streets of Portland. It shouldn't even be an option to put money in the hands of those that criminalize poverty and exist to perpetuate a system that makes rehabilitation tactically impossible. Finally, I urge you to adopt a plan that ensures appropriate accountability mechanisms so the community you're seeking to involve in these hearings knows which aspects of its feedback are adopted and how exactly. For parts that are not incorporated, people should know why. And in order to exit this pandemic and be prepared for the concurrent crises that face our city, you have to be zealous and bold right now. I urge you to do more than listen in these sessions. Please uplift the voices and the stories that matter in these conversations and make the budget work around people's basic needs, not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Hyung.
Hi, my name is Hyung Nam, and I'm also from Portland Metro People's Coalition, which represents about 25 community organizations and work with several other community organizations as well. I also served as a Budget Advisory Committee member for Portland Police Bureau and also served on our brief Socially Responsible Investments Committee. I'm concerned about economic development and stabilization to recover back to normal. Normal was record inequality and gentrifying development accompanied by oppressive policing and violence, criminalizing people that don't generate profits for the powerful and wealthy. Prosper Portland, the Portland Business Alliance, and enhanced service districts like Clean and Safe have been a driver of much of that. Right now, we're seeing so much misleading narratives from the police and Portland Business Alliance about downtown as we face the upcoming Clean and Safe contract renewal. Let's remember that they were caught lying last summer, blaming their economic losses due to COVID on protests. And they can't be trusted. We're seeing this constant narrative that's really a dog whistle about clean and safe, really problematic terms without mentioning the fact that the majority of the arrests since 2016 continue to be unhoused people, with repeated arrests indicating that such tactics are not only ineffective and wasteful, but oppressive, making it much more difficult for the victims to recover from their situations. And let's remember that African Americans are overrepresented in both police brutality and the housing crisis. Furthermore, the Portland police, I noticed, made 50 rapid response positions from a detached unit into a full-time unit over the summer to over-police protests and basically threaten public health while we try to fund our parks and important services with levies and bonds based on unequal property tax assessments. We need to do much better. We can't go back to normal. We need to rethink things. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Melissa.
Hi. I am here today to talk to you about the Portland Parks Foundation and our request for $100,000 from the mayor's budget. This, again, as Randy had mentioned earlier, would restore the amounts that we have been funded for in the past 2018, 19, and 19, 20. He mentioned really what we've been up to, and I just want to kind of give you a little bit of background. You know, we started over 20 years ago, and it was really a capital projects group. So the big things like Directors Park. But we also did projects like Holly Farm Park, which actually serves Portland's largest Muslim population. We have steadily expanded our scope. We've gone into Northeast Portland and done Cully Park with the Native Gathering Garden. I don't know if any of you have seen that garden, but we did a work party there as part of our Friends and Allies Summit. And it was, I mean, it's just amazing place. When things kind of went south for everybody, we shifted our gears as well and helped Portland Parks with a March campaign for food boxes for the Sun school families who weren't getting the regular meals that were part of Summer Free for All. And then, of course, we helped with the Parks Levy. So we have been out there working on a lot of these great projects that are really citywide. And I just think that it's important to, at a time of kind of change in our community, to help organizations that are helping others. You know, our motto is we help people help parks. Well, this year we're helping people help parks in downtown with Paseo. We're helping in small community parks around the city. And we're really reaching out to communities and really asking them what they want, not telling them what we think they should have. So we have engaged in the community, and we just hope that you'll continue to support our efforts so that we can have another successful year of people helping parks. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three speakers will be James Strom, Yasmine Ibarra, and Jennifer Lanier. We will start with James.
Good evening, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. My name is James Strom, and I am in my fourth year working with the G4S security team here on the City of Portland contract. I'm also a member of the SEIU Local 49. I'm proud of the frontline work that I do for the city. I'm proud to be an active member of this union. Prior to my employment here with the G4S, I used to work for non-union contractors. Managers were able to take advantage of people by not giving them benefits or proper compensation for the skill set that they requested of them. Thanks to the city fair wage policy and our union contract, city officers earn good wages, they have access to paid time off, and they have job security and protection from unfair treatment here. But even with our relatively good wages and benefits, it has been difficult to recruit officers who have the necessary education level and training to work on this contract. To ensure adequate staffing by qualified officers, the city needs to make sure it is including enough funding in the budget to cover its current subcontracted services to make sure these jobs continue to offer good wages and benefits. And the city should consider increasing these contracts to expand to sanitation and security services beyond downtown. I also ask that the city looks to restore the cost of living increases that were suspended last year due to the pandemic for classifications covered by the fair wage policy. My coworkers and I have fought hard to raise standards for the people who clean and secure city buildings, and the city's continued investment in union contractors is important to us, to our families, and to our community. It's been a tough year for Portland, but despite all of these challenges, my coworkers and I are committed to keep delivering their quality services for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Yasmine.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Yasmine. I'm the political organizer for SEIU Local 49. Our union has 15,000 members, which are healthcare workers and property service workers, including the subcontracted janitors, security officers, and laundry workers for the city of Portland. I've submitted written testimony with further detail, but just wanted to draw attention to a few things. We believe that the city's continued investment in its union janitorial, security, and laundry contracts is a foundational piece of Portland's healing and recovery process. Accordingly, we urge the city to include sufficient funding in the upcoming budget to adequately cover the following: union standards for wages and benefits for subcontracted services, along with the restoration of the fair wage cost of living increases. While we commend the city's consistent use of these union contractors, we are further calling on the city to restore the cost of living increases for these job classifications covered by the fair wage policy. Classifications covered by this policy include some of the lowest paid workers at the city who, despite being essential workers on the front line of the pandemic, saw their vital wages increase frozen last year. Second, we ask that you support increased funding for expanded services. We urge the city to seize the opportunity presented by this historic moment in time to expand its cleaning and security contracts beyond downtown to additional neighborhoods that have suffered from the various impacts of the past year. The city's current investment in union subcontracted cleaning for security services is in line with its long-held values, but a deeper and broader commitment will be needed over the coming years to help Portland rebuild stronger than before. As you contemplate the 2021 budget, we ask the city to ensure the budget accounts for maintaining and expanding its union service contracts to truly enable our communities to build back better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jennifer.
Hi there, folks. My name is Jennifer Lanier. I'm co-artistic director of Original Practice Shakespeare Festival and a member of the Portland Artistic Directors Roundtable. Now, according to the 2019 study of tourism conducted by Travel Portland in 2018, 8.7 million person trips by tourists generated $5.9 billion in direct spending for Portland. At the 2018 State of the Arts Portland City Council meeting, it was reported that 90% of that money was spent on the arts. A study by Eventbrite in 2014 showed that 78% of millennials would rather spend more money on experiences than on items. Portland is the third most popular moving destination for millennials, and in 2017, 25,000 of them moved to Portland. Now, the U.S. Census says the population has increased by over 15,000 since then, so it's likely that the number of millennials has increased as well. Millennials spend money on experiences, concerts, festivals, theater, rather than items. And the next generation, Gen Z, is also following that trend. Millennials and Gen Z are half the population of the U.S., and to be the destination that it wants to be, Portland needs to invest in the people who make their brand, the creators of these cultural experiences, the artists, the people who use their time, their education, their skill to create the cultural experiences that bring tourists to Portland. So there has to be more space in the budget to support the people who make the experiences that folk want to spend money on. Increasing funding in the arts is good for Portland's bottom line. It's good for business. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next three speakers will be Alan Hippolito, Matthew Miller, and Mel Scott. We'll start with Alan.
Thank you. Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Alan Hippolito. I work for a nonprofit named SUMA. In the words of your friend and mine, Rey España, it's a blessing to be here with you today. I'm here to speak in support of the BPS supplemental request, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Organizations supporting this request with written testimony include African Refugee Immigrant Association, the ARC Multnomah Clackamas, Coalition of Communities of Color, Community Vision, Hacienda CDC, ERCO, Latino Network, NEA, POIC, and Verde. SUMA supports the BPS supplemental because it is urgently needed. The 24 organizations who distributed tech kits under the CARES Act Digital Divide program are telling us they want to extend and build that community-led process into other city technology decisions and programs. They see new and urgent needs to engage with you on the digital issues impacting their communities, but they lack the capacity. We have a real chance to bring these communities into the city's technological decisions. Absent this supplemental, I expect that many in the city will return to business as usual, to a patchwork of tech activities, this program, that network, this office, that plan, that are unfamiliar, unwelcoming, and distrusted by many frontline communities. This is why we had to create something new to build the CARES Act approach, and looking beyond this supplemental, why we should stipulate that addressing the digital divide is fundamental to pandemic recovery. We also support the supplemental because it is the kind of investment in continuity that builds long-term collaboration between the city and community. In your recent work session, many council members noted the overlapping responsibilities of the city's tech programs. If you're confused, think about how it is for us. You need a better structure, and you need community-led spaces to imagine that future. So I urge you to support the BPS supplemental. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Matthew.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak here today. My name is Matthew Miller. I am the president of the Portland Area Theater Alliance. I'm a member of Linestorm Playwrights. I'm a member of the Dramatists Guild, PDX Playwrights, and I'm also a member of the Portland Civic Theater Guild. I would just like to encourage everybody to, when you are making your decisions, to make sure that theater and the arts in general are included in your budget. Most of us will do this work for free. And I think most people assume that the arts is created for free. That's not the reality of the situation. Most of us work very low-paying jobs in order to do what we love. And I would highly encourage, when you do make your decisions, to also realize that the arts is a huge economic driver in our community. All the money that is spent on the arts typically stays and goes to working professionals who live and reside here. And the Portland Area Theater Alliance represents hundreds of members in the community who make their living in the theater arts. So I just wanted to advocate for local theater makers and the art scene in general, and hope that you include us in your budget in the future.
Thank you. Next, we have Mel. Mel? Looks like you're muted. Mel? Okay, we'll come back to Mel. Next, we have Katie Larsel. Katie?
Hello, this is Katie. All right. Yeah, thank you, Commissioners and Mayor Wheeler, for this opportunity to present. I'm here representing the Economic Development Subcommittee of the East Portland Action Plan. We thought it was time for us to begin talking directly to you about something we need in East Portland. We need an update of the East Portland Action Plan, but not just any update. We want the update to come in the form of an anti-racism equity plan for East Portland. Last year's racial reckoning in this country revealed how difficult and interwoven racism is as a community force. So of course, racism is active in all the economic and social systems in East Portland. It's kind of like the secret sauce. East Portland is the only district where poverty has increased since 2010 in Portland, with half of all Portland families in poverty living in East Portland. Our proportion of immigrant families and youth is higher than any other part of Portland. We have more transit riders. Now, dealing with racism and poverty directly would open up East Portland to the kind of economic and community development that has eluded us till now. This anti-racism equity plan that I'm asking for, it should be community informed and driven. Each BIPOC community would have an active role in its content. It should be partnered with stakeholders and budgetary gatekeepers such as Multnomah County, the state of Oregon, Metro. Anyone with power who has a stake needs to be part of this plan. And it should be focused on economic development, job training, education, community health, and well-being and policing. Say I'm finished?
Yes, that's your time.
Okay, that's all I have to say. I'm asking for this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go back to Mel.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler and council members for this precious time. I have already sent each of you emails, written testimony, and commented on the budget. And I urge you to read through those materials, but I won't take up that much time. The main theme is getting the city to have a stronger community and tackle job creation, housing, and grow and stretch our dollars, and have direct local lending with below market rates for things we want to accomplish, such as affordable housing, infrastructure, local businesses, creation, and education. Local contractors get supported rather than out-of-state contractors. Public banks can make loans for disaster preparedness, and so we could get fast relief and total tax base is preserved. I strongly believe that the Portland love of all things local needs this. So I urge you to consider it. Thank you for your time on this urgent matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll turn it back to Jen to introduce our final section of testimony this evening.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to open it up for open public testimony. And again, the same rules apply. You'll have 2 minutes for testimony, and then Zach will time it and tell you time when those 2 minutes have concluded. And just a reminder again, if you're joining us by phone, you can push *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Our next 3 speakers will be Ross Leonard, Karen Carvin, and Anna Roberts. We will start with Ross.
My name is Ross Leonard. I'm the janitor and union steward at the Justice Center, working for Relay Resources. I have cleaned the Justice Center for the past 12 years and been a janitor for 13 plus. Having a union is especially important for Relay janitors because Relay employs people with disabilities. Many of us, including me, have ongoing mental disabilities or disabilities of any sort that can be very expensive, and if we don't have the union insurance for it. Me personally, I have terrible anxiety, depression, and a long-term mental disability. I hope you'll read my written testimony about what janitors in the city have been going through this past year, and why the city needs to restore this cost of living increase for the city janitors and security officers under the fair wage policy. Here are some of my personal experiences from the past year. Number 1, tear gas getting into my eyes during the nightly protests. I struggled to see, dump the trash, and do my daily work with my lungs burning and my tears streaming down my face. 2, going home in the middle of the night at about 2 o'clock in the morning, it felt like a war zone. Seeing the windows smashed out of the buildings where my coworkers cleaning. Seeing the exits of these buildings blocked by hoses and fire, and being afraid my coworkers were trapped inside. Running away from sudden loud bangs and getting home to an empty apartment. Not being able to be in my in the physical presence of my friends or family for the comfort after these experiences due to the COVID and their fear of coming to visit me downtown. Number 4, fear of being infected by staff, officers, or inmates as COVID cases went up. This year, the Justice Center has often been crowded with extra police officers who were brought in because of the protests and the COVID precautions weren't always possible. During all this, my coworkers and I learned that we wouldn't be getting a raise this past year because of the city froze the regular increase under the fair wage policy. On the one hand, we were called the heroes and frontline workers, but on the other hand, I can't even afford the increased prices of basic items like toilet paper. It's embarrassing I've had to borrow money and toilet paper from friends and family and neighbors. I want to support my local community and small businesses, but I'm strapped. Excuse me, sorry. I hope the city will approve the living wage increase that takes into account the cost increase we have had to absorb over the past 2 years. Also, the hardworking city janitors had been keeping the inside and outside of the city buildings clean and safe for both the city staff and all local visitors of Portland. Thank you so much for your time and consideration, Ross Leonard.
Thank you. And our last speaker tonight is going to be Karen. Is Karen still in the meeting? Karen?
Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. If I disappear, I'm having connectivity issues, but let me get started. My name is Karen Curvin. I'm a Portland resident and a member of the Portland Parks Foundation Board. I am here today to encourage the City of Portland to restore funding of PPF at the $100,000 level from the mayor's budget. I'm just adding to comments today made earlier by Randy Gregg and Melissa Nato. I don't want to repeat what they have covered, but I will say that operational support from the city allows PPF to focus more on efforts on fundraising and implementation of projects rather than just for its own operations. The city investment has helped PPS develop or contribute to a number of important projects, including Barbara Walker Crossing, Summer Free for All, Friends and Allies Summits, and the Small Grants Program for grassroots supporters of our parks. With our 20th anniversary this year, we are hoping and looking to play an essential role in the reopening of downtown Portland. PPF, Portland Parks Foundation, provides a direct conduit for private sector contributions, which improve our parks and natural areas and public spaces, and which are critical to our city's livability and the health of our citizens. PPF is a great investment for city funds, and we will use them wisely. Thank you for allowing me to comment today.
Thank you. And that concludes our comment periods for this evening. I will turn it back to Jen.
Hey, thank you. A sincere thank you for all of our community members who provided testimony today. Next, we're going to move to our closing comments from City Council members and Mayor Wheeler, and we will start with Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you. And first, I'd like to appreciate the City Budget Office for setting up a process to be here today to listen to the community in this budget process. And I want to also acknowledge what I heard about how this isn't the most accessible way in this time for everyone. And we look forward to it being different next year when hopefully we can be in person together and also think of other ways to maintain accessibility in different ways, including virtually. I also want to thank the community leaders who testified tonight, as well as the trusted or the community members who are working in the space, but also sharing their experiences as residents in Portland and people who care about our community, and for sharing their recommendation and priorities. And I just want to share a few of the things that resonated for me tonight. In particular, it's the importance of investments in diverse districts like the Jade and Albina areas and others, and also the importance of maintaining our support
for systems and work that maintain our work to keep our housing development on track so that we can make sure that we have what we need to meet the demand in the community right now, and also maintaining our work in the Joint Office of Homelessness, also supporting our culinary scene and our vibrant arts scene in the community as well. But really, and also the investment in digital framework for to address Portland's digital divide. But really at the heart of it is that we need to keep community at the center and budget to our values. And we need to think about how we can't go back to normal and instead be zealous and bold and uplift stories that matter from people at the margin. So there's so many more notes that I have, but these are just a few that really resonated with me tonight. At the last session, I talked about how we need to budget to the values that we all hold and meaningfully engage with the community as we do that. And I'm affirming that again tonight. And I know that my colleagues feel the very same way. And I'm hopeful that even in this hard time for all of our communities, we can produce a city budget that demonstrates we are budgeting with the needs of our community right at the center. So again, just want to appreciate what I heard. Thank you everyone for taking the time. This is very helpful and informative for me as I think about the things that I want to lift up in this process. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you so much to everyone who showed up this evening to testify. It was quite there were a lot of voices tonight from all, and you hit on so many different categories. I wasn't actually expecting that. And so it was refreshing. And it just reminds us that we're not going to go back to exactly where we were, because we've been through a lot this past year. And you can tell by just the way people are showing up to testify and to advocate. The three things that really stuck out for me, I was really pleased personally to have members from the arts and entertainment community showing up. Arts often is dismissed sometimes in terms of the economy, and we know that it's very foundational. It's one of the reasons Portland is special. And I know proportionally we spend more time and money on the arts than your average city of our size. And I appreciated someone reminding us that generations younger than mine actually really do spend money on experiences. And what a great way to spend money when it comes to experience than the arts. So I appreciate all the testimony I heard around the arts. I also want to touch on how it was beyond downtown, as Commissioner Rubio mentioned, and it was a lot of different communities representing different neighborhoods throughout our city. And I think during COVID, that has become even more apparent to a lot of us. I'm not the only one that has really focused on my own neighborhood businesses to help them survive, and seeing those pockets thriving throughout the city has been really important. And as we continue to revive and to prosper, I think you're going to see more of, like all great system changes, from the bottom up. And in commerce, that would be, I think, block by block and neighborhood by neighborhood. So it was very refreshing to hear those comments. I also appreciated the comments actually about the food carts. I just know that story downtown of when we had a hotel take that space over at Alder, and the excitement of finally brokering the deal to move those food carts to another location. So I know we need to follow up on that. And finally, and for me, really just very important, is that people recognize that business development services is a direct service component of the city of Portland. And we need those services to allow us to continue to build back. I've heard so many stories from members of the BDS staff, like the testimony that was heard earlier, where they came on board, say in 2012 or 2014, and how it was still very fragile because of all of the layoffs during the Great Recession of 2008, and how the skill sets and the competitive market for those skill sets are difficult to replicate quickly and to train for. And so it's just really key for us to keep business development services strong during this time of like survival to prosperity. And I also note that at least what we've been hearing in our office and throughout is a real coalition coming together from labor and business together, from the low-income housing community and beyond, and definitely residents and small businesses. The BDS has fortunately moved towards a technology system just prior to COVID, thank goodness. Then they had to adapt during COVID. And now there's a lot of anxiety at BDS that through all the change that they've experienced in 1 year, that they can continue to stay strong in their positions and serve our city. And so I just really appreciate the groundswelling of support that's coming to see BDS for what it is, which is a direct service component of the city of Portland. Thanks again for setting this up, Budget Director Pinard and your team. You always do great work. And again, all of you in the community who showed up to represent. I appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. I have a brief note. Commissioner Hardesty is not in attendance tonight, but she wants you to know that your input is incredibly valuable to her. Her staff is here to take note of the testimony, and she has access to the archive of tonight's meeting so that she can hear from everyone. So next we'll move to Commissioner Maps.
Thank you. And I'd like to start by echoing some themes that were touched on by my fellow commissioners. I want to thank staff who helped pull together this important hearing, and I want to thank each and every individual who came out tonight to talk about the budget issues that really matter to you and your community. I want to reassure you that I heard you loud and clear. Some of the things I heard tonight were a call for culturally specific programs that serve BIPOC businesses that have been impacted by COVID. I've also heard many folks testify about the needs for our budget to reflect our values. We should come together as a community to support the dignity of labor, and we should build a public safety system that reflects our priorities like prevention and rehabilitation. I also heard the need to maintain basic city services that help us grow economically, specifically around BDS, parks, and the arts. And I also heard some exciting calls for new innovations and new programs. It was great to hear about what is called the Culinary Corridor, which is a re-envisioning of our food cart tradition. And the Frog Ferry too, which I think will make, or has the potential to make important contributions to our attempts to fight climate change. You've given me a lot to think about. I look forward to continuing this discussion. I believe we get together again this weekend, I think on Saturday. Thanks to everyone who has told us what they care about and helped us get a little bit smarter as we try to figure out how to navigate these turbulent waters. Thank you.
Thank you, from Commissioner Maps. Lastly, we'll hear from Mayor Wheeler, and then I will provide an explanation of next steps. And then Mayor Wheeler, if you don't mind adjourning us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate everybody who took the time, either invited testimony or those who just showed up. I always really enjoy the public testimony. And, frankly, I wish there was also a better way for us not to just hear, but also to reflect back on the testimony we heard. And so I'm going to take a moment and try to do that. First of all, there was really nothing that I heard tonight that surprises me in terms of what people are saying they support. And it comports with what the council has already described as our top priorities. We've described as our top priorities collectively that we want to address the homeless crisis, and that means finding humane and effective ways to help people get off the street and stay off the street and connect them to whatever services they can. This is my fifth budget. And this will probably be my toughest budget because I've now gone through a series of significant cut budgets, including last year, which was a massive reduction budget. And so there's no easy way to do this. I'm just being really honest with people. I think it's important as an elected official just to treat people like adults and tell them the truth. And the truth, folks, is that this is going to be a very difficult budget to add anything new to without substantially reducing in other areas. We want the fancy Tesla, but we've got a budget for a used Volkswagen. And so what I hope is that the used Volkswagen is well thought out and that it's in an outstanding mechanical shape and that we can get the most bang for the buck out of it. And here's what I know, what I think I know, based on my initial efforts to put together a proposed budget. As in previous years, it will come as no surprise to people that I will continue to do everything I can to support in my proposed budget. That means the first take on the budget, the services and programs in place to address homelessness in the city of Portland. I'm not going to make a promise today that I can hold the entire budget whole, but I'm going to do my level best to protect our funding in the Joint Office of Homeless Services, despite the fact that the Joint Office has now become a substantial general fund bureau for the city of Portland just in the last several years. It is subjected to the same constraint reductions as every other bureau, that's 5%. And that's near and dear to my heart to continue to be a good partner with Multnomah County and other community-based partners. The second priority for the city council was safety. And we will have significant discussions, I have no doubt, around safety, particularly the role of the Portland Police Bureau going forward. And I appreciate the fact that my colleagues have already demonstrated a commitment to have thoughtful and collaborative and productive conversations. And that led to a compromise last week around addressing the epidemic, and I use that word intentionally, epidemic of gun violence and homicides in our community. We made a decision to invest substantial resources into the community. That goes in alignment with some decisions that I have made as the police commissioner around use of law enforcement, around prevention, around intervention, around investigative follow-up. We're not all in agreement on that, and that's okay. That's a basis for a conversation. So that's going to be a significant issue, and I'm mindful of the individual who testified today and said divest from the police. I personally don't agree with that. I think there are, however, good cases to be made about investing upstream in alternatives to law enforcement or incarceration. Those things include connecting people with job opportunities. That includes connecting people with educational opportunities. That includes making sure that families have access to adequate health care. Some of these things are obviously beyond the purview of city government, but over the long term, I think we're all philosophically aligned that it would be better to spend more money on healthy families and healthy communities than on law enforcement. The problem from my perspective is you've got to get there. You have to build a bridge. You're going from one trapeze to the other, and I don't want to let go of one trapeze completely until I know there's another trapeze to grab onto. And so that's the balancing. It's a question of timing for all of us. I will continue to advocate for funding to reduce gun violence and homicides in our community because I think it's important. Finally, we are in complete agreement around economic recovery and coming out of the COVID crisis. And I have found this council to be incredibly innovative and thoughtful and creative around all manner of ways to recover. I don't believe there's anybody on this city council that does not understand completely that Portland is a small business economy and that our recovery is going to be dependent upon our small businesses surviving the COVID crisis. We're not in the recovery phase yet. We're still in the resilience phase. And this council will have conversations not only about this budget process upcoming, but also about how we deploy our American Rescue Plan resources. And there's obviously a strong interest on my part, and I believe on the part of the council, to make sure that small businesses are supported throughout that effort. That also includes the arts. And I read with interest this morning about the venue owners and operators being really desperate at this point to keep their facilities operational and be able to survive long enough to get through the pandemic. I'm appreciative of the role that the Parks Foundation wants to play, not only in protecting and preserving our parks, but thinking a little more broadly about community and events that bring people together and tie us all together. I think that makes a lot of good sense. And then last, I'm appreciative of the conversations we hear in this virtual gathering about partnerships. And that's, partnerships are great when things are good, but they're essential when your back is against the wall. And right now, our backs are against the wall. We've had a really, really tough year. The city council can't do this alone. I certainly can't do it alone as mayor. We're going to have to rely on the strength of our community partnerships. And so I do appreciate that request that's been put forward by the Parks Foundation. I'm mindful of our labor partners and the squeeze that the economic consequences of COVID have put on you and your colleagues and your families. And I'm also mindful of the fact that during this crisis, the demand for services for vulnerable populations has escalated dramatically. And yet, our ability to compensate you adequately for the incredibly important services that you provide has fallen short. And I think all of us on the city council are trying to weigh that reality against our need to, our requirement under state law to balance the budget. And so these are all going to continue to weigh on us as we continue our budget discussions. I just thought it was great tonight that people highlighted some aspect of each and every one of these elements. I thought it was a really good use of time tonight. I hope people who testified tonight felt heard, felt respected, felt that their time was well spent. That's always my hope, and I'm sure my colleagues share that. And so with that, I want to thank you for that. And I will turn it back over to you, Director Kennard, or Jen, am I turning it back to you? Back to Jen first, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly, I'm going to give an explanation of our next steps. There are 2 more additional community budget listening sessions. The next one will be this Saturday, April 17th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that community listening session will be focused on community safety. Next, on Wednesday, May 5th, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. will be the mayor's proposed budget hearing. Outside of those 2 meetings, you can always provide online testimony at portlandoregon.gov/CBO, or you can email testimony to budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. And all of the testimony that we collect will be provided to City Council officers. So I will pass it back to Mayor Wheeler to adjourn us for this evening.
Well, it's not every day we adjourn early. So we'll give everybody, it's a beautiful, beautiful Portland night. We'll give everybody a half an hour of their time back. Thank you, Director Kennard, for your great work. Jen, as always, thank you for doing a great job of facilitating for us and keeping us on schedule. Colleagues, thanks. I always appreciate your comments. And I especially want to thank those who chose to testify tonight. Thank you. With that, we are adjourned. Enjoy your evening.